If you want a child, you must give something, she said. Nothing in this world comes without a price. Are you ready to pay? The queen's hands shook, but she thought of the king's weary eyes and the whispers of the people. She thought of her own heart, aching each time she saw a child laugh. I am ready, she whispered. The priestess smiled, showing teeth stained red with cola. Then listen well. You shall have your son. He will be strong. He will carry the stool, and the people will rejoice. But his birth will carry a shadow. The land will pay, as you have asked for what was not freely given. Once upon a time, in the olden days, when men still read the sky like a book and the wind carried news between villages, the kingdom of Ezinagu stood strong like a great Iroko tree. Its farmlands stretched wide, its rivers sang in the rainy season, and its people walked tall because their king, Agumba, had led them through many victories. Each dry season, when harmattan dust sat gently on thatched roofs and the nights were cool, the praise singers lifted their voices in the palace square. They beat the talking drums and praised the king whose spear had scattered enemies and whose shield had covered his people. Children copied the warriors by drawing lines in the red earth and marching in small steps, and old men told stories by moonlight of the time King Agumba chased raiders back across the hill paths, never letting fear sit in his heart. The palace itself was a place of order and beauty, made of mud walls smoothed with red clay and roofs of fine thatch that looked like crowns. The courtyards were swept every morning until they shone in the sun. There were carved doors that told the history of Ezinagu, a leopard here, a brave woman there, a farmer carrying yam over his shoulder, and at the center, the figure of a strong king. At the heart of this palace lived Queen Ifedi, a woman with quiet eyes and a soft voice. She walked with the calm of deep water, and her smile could soften a quarrel. The women of the palace loved her. The market women blessed her name when she passed, and the old ones called her a good tree that would one day give shade. But even good trees can hold a hidden crack. As the seasons turned and the moon came full and went thin again, Queen Ifedi did not bear a child. In the beginning, people said, "The gods take their time to tie a fine cloth." They were patient. They believed. The king brought gifts to the temple. He offered rams and white fowl. He poured palm wine on the earth for the ancestors and said, "See me, remember me. Give my house a child who will carry the stool after me." The priests burned incense that carried a sweet smell into the morning air. They washed the king's hands, spoke blessings, and lifted their cowrie shells to read the will of the spirits. Year followed year, like footprints in the dust. The festivals still came, the flutes still sang at harvest, and the wrestlers still locked hands in the square, while the crowd clapped in rhythm. Yet a small root of unease began to travel under the soil of Ezinagu. In the space between praise songs, a whisper rose. At first it was soft, the kind of whisper that sits behind a smile. Then it grew bolder and moved from the shade into the sun. "Where is the child?" it asked. "Where is the son who will inherit the stool? What will happen to us when the king grows old?" In the evenings, the elders gathered in the palace to speak truth to the king. They did not come with anger. They came with the weight of the kingdom on their shoulders. They sat on low stools in a neat circle while a servant placed a calabash of water at the center. The oldest elder cleared his throat, and the sound carried a long life of wisdom in it. "My king," he said, "the leopard walks with caution even when it has no rival. We honor your strength and we honor your victories, but even the strongest tree thinks about the season that will come after it. A river that does not plan its path will flood the wrong places. We ask the gods to bless your house with a child, and we ask you to keep asking." King Agumba listened. He was not a man who closed his ears. He lifted his eyes to the rafters where the lantern light threw shadows that looked like quiet spirits and answered with a steady voice. I have asked. I am asking. I will continue to ask. He turned his eyes to Queen Ifedi with a tenderness that only the two of them knew, and for a brief moment the mask of the king fell away, and he was only a husband with a longing heart. Queen Ifedi bore the weight of the whispers like a calabash on her head that she could not put down. She spoke little of it, but when darkness covered the compound and the world softened, she lay awake and listened to the sounds of the night, the far cry of an owl, the rustle of palm fronds, and she prayed in her heart. "Let my womb be a good field," she whispered. "Let my name carry laughter again." In the daylight, she kept her posture, greeted her people, blessed the children who ran through the courtyards, and made sure no harsh word passed her lips. She was careful with joy, careful with anger, careful even with hope, because hope that grows too big and too fast can break the heart if it falls. Some women avoided her eyes and spoke in corners. "Is there a hidden offense?" one would ask as she tied her wrapper. "Or have the gods closed a door we cannot open?" Another would answer, "Maybe time will yet speak. Maybe the child is walking slowly to find this house." There were also women who were kind, who pressed kola into the queen's hand and said, "Your day will come." But kindness too can be heavy when it keeps returning with empty hands. There were nights when the king invited the chief priests to stay until the moon climbed high. They drew lines in the dust and counted cowries. They strung words like beads and tried to read the meaning of each sign. On one such night, as the cricket song lay like a sheet over the palace, the priest spoke. "My king," he said, "the river has a voice, but sometimes it speaks from far away. The child may come by the road we know, or by a path we have not walked. Keep your hands clean before the gods. Keep your heart steady." The king nodded as if to say, "I will do what a man can do, and more if I must." He offered thanks and sent the man away with gifts. The next morning, the palace woke to ordinary life again. The gate opened. Messengers ran with news. Farmers came to settle disputes about boundaries and goats that had eaten cassava leaves. Women came to plead for their sons who had wrestled in the square and bruised each other in pride. The king judged with patience. He did not let the dust of worry sit on small matters. He held the kingdom like a calabash full of water, carefully so it would not spill. When disputes ended, he smiled and told the men to shake hands. When complaints sat on the ground too long, he lifted them up and carried them to their end. But the silence about a child walked beside him like a shadow. When he greeted the people, he saw it in the way their eyes slipped away after the first joy. When he sat to eat roasted yam with palm oil in the evening, he tasted the emptiness between one morsel and the next. He did not speak of it to anyone but the queen. In the privacy of their room, where the red clay walls seemed to listen with a gentle ear, he told her the truth. "Ifedi," he said, "your name means something is there. I hold on to that meaning, something is there. Maybe we do not see it, but it is there." Queen Ifedi looked at him with eyes that had learned how to hold both pain and peace in the same bowl. "My husband," she answered softly, "your words are a mat I can sit on. I will keep sitting. I will keep believing." She did not cry in front of him often. She saved her tears for the night when even the crickets were tired and a person could cry without a witness. When she wept, she did it like a woman who did not want to wake a child who was yet to be born. In the market, life spun as it always did. A dance of bargaining and laughter, of woven baskets and clay pots, of dried fish and clean yams stacked like little hills. The talk of the town rose with the heat and fell with the afternoon rains. But always, somewhere in the talk, someone would say, "The stool needs a son." Another would say, The king's strength is a wall, but a wall must have a gate that will stand after it. The old ones remembered stories of other lands where the stool passed to brothers or cousins when a king left the world. Those stories walked through Ezinagu like strangers carrying warnings. Some houses sharpened their ears to listen for the step of chance. In the quiet of many homes, small dreams grew, dreams that the stool might look for a new head to sit on. Such dreams are like dry leaves, one touch of wind and they rush together, making a sound the palace cannot ignore. King Agumba heard that sound, and his face grew older by a little line that did not leave. He did not show anger to his people. He did not roar like a lion in a trap. Instead, he became more generous. He sent palm oil to the widows. He sent yam to households that had suffered a bad harvest. He visited the age grade groups and praised their work on the road that led to the river. He gave goats for the next festival to make sure the drums would not be silent and the storytellers would not lack stories to tell. He did all this not to buy love, but to remind his people that a king who feeds you is still your king, whether or not a child sits on his knee. As the second rainy season after the last great war began, a soft mist rose each morning from the earth. The young boys ran barefoot through the fields to scare birds from the yam mounds. Women laughed as they weeded, their hoes cutting neat arcs, their backs strong and patient. In the evening, fires lit up doorways like small suns. The whole land smelled of cooked soup and wood smoke. Night by night, Queen Ifedi walked the palace courtyards and listened to the life she wanted to preserve. The chatter of servants, the soft call of guards across the gate, the sound of a flute from far beyond the walls. With each sound, she made a silent promise to the kingdom. I will not be the reason you become a story told with sadness, she said in her heart. One night, the king called for a small private rite in the royal temple. It was not a grand gathering. He did not wear all the heavy beads. He went with a simple cloth tied at his waist and a spirit of humility that he had learned only through longing. The royal temple sat behind the palace, a quiet yard where the ground was always clean and the air always cool. There were carved masks hung on the wall to honor the faces of the ancestors, and a stone altar that had known many seasons of prayer. The priest lit a small fire. Its flame danced like a child who did not yet fear the dark. King Agumba knelt and bowed his head. He spoke to the gods and to the spirits of those who had sat on the stool before him. Fathers who walked this red earth and left footprints too deep to wash away, he said, I honor you. I ask for your eyes on my house. Let a child come to this palace, not for my pride alone, but for the peace of the land. Give me a son who will hold the staff after me, who will sit on the stool without shame. He paused, and the silence in the temple felt like a hand on his shoulder. If I have offended, he continued, show me my offense. If I must give more than I have given, teach my hands to open. The priest rang a bell 3 times. The sound was thin and bright, like a path cut through thick bush. He said the old words his own father had taught him. He tied palm fronds at the temple door to mark the prayer. He read the pattern of the shells and said, wait and hold and wait. The king rose, not with joy, but with a calm that comes when a man has given his heart without hiding anything. After that night, Queen Ifedi began to go more often to the women's courtyard, where the older women kept their medicines and prayers. She did not call on any lesser gods or walk forbidden paths. She sought only wisdom that was admitted in daylight. The old women washed her feet with warm water scented with leaves. They tied a clean white cloth around her waist and spoke blessings into her hair as they oiled it. Mother of a future child, they called her, not to tease fate, but to invite it gently, the way you call a shy bird with crumbs in your hand. When they gave her herbs to drink, they told stories so that she would smile while she swallowed. A smile opens the throat, one woman said with a wink, and a smile did come. In the palace, the king ordered that cruel talk should not live. He did not want any woman to use Queen Ifedi's name to sharpen her tongue. Anyone who mocked in secret found that the palace walls had ears. The punishment was not severe, but it was wise. The mocker would come to the queen and kneel, offer kola, and ask for forgiveness. Many learned that shame is a poor bed to sleep on. Still, as the moon changed its face and the rain softened the earth, those who watched the palace began to think of time in a new way. They counted not the days of work, but the days without a song of birth. The praise singers, who once began their chant with the king's victories, started to add a quiet line near the end, a line that asked for a seed to be placed in the royal ground. It was not loud. It was a leaf hung to tell the wind which way to blow. Queen Ifedi thought of her mother, long gone to the land of spirits. She remembered a saying the woman had loved. When a jar does not break in your hands, it is waiting for its water. She held on to that saying as a secret companion. At dusk, when she sat with the king, she told him, "I carry my jar carefully. I believe it will hold water." He looked at her, and the warmth in his gaze was like a fire that does not scorch but makes the night friendly. There were children in the palace who ran about like goats in the first rain. They were the sons and daughters of servants and guards, and their laughter came easily. When they bumped into the queen, they stopped and bowed with the clumsy grace of small bodies, and she blessed them with her palm on their heads. Sometimes that touch made her hand tremble, but she did not pull it away. She believed a hand that blesses another's child teaches itself the shape of blessing. One afternoon, the sky piled great white clouds like heaps of cotton over the hills. The air promised rain. The market grew busy as women hurried to gather their goods. The drums at the palace began to call for a small feast in honor of the yams that had grown fat and healthy that season. The king thought, "Let the people eat. Let their mouths remember sweetness even if their hearts hold worry." He called the butchers, the cooks, the drummers, the singers. He sent messengers to the wrestling ground to invite the strongest men to match their strength for the joy of the crowd. When night fell, torches burned around the square, and their flames made shapes on the walls where children pretended to catch them with their fingers. The smell of roasted meat rose up, and the storytellers cleared their throats to begin. The praise singers stood before the king and lifted their deep voices. They sang of the hunt, where Agumba faced a wild boar alone. They sang of the hill path, where his footsteps had frightened raiders away. They sang of Ezinagu, where women's backs were straight and men's hands were clever. Between the lines, the drums spoke their own language, a language the feet understood. Queen Ifedi sat beside the king, bright in her cloth, her wrists shining with beads that had touched the wrists of queens before her. She smiled at the people, and they smiled back, because love is a mirror that throws a face back to you. As the drums quickened, a rain wind came across the square. It blew the smell of rain and leaves, heads tilted up like flowers seeking water. Then the first drops fell, big as seeds, striking the dust and opening tiny dark circles that grew into a wet earth smell. People laughed and lifted their hands. The drummers kept playing under a shelter, and the sound of their rhythm mixed with the patter of rain on thatch. It felt to many like a blessing poured from the sky. When the rain had washed the heat away, the children danced and slipped, catching themselves with shrieks of delight. The elders retreated under eaves and told stories of the year when the rains had come late and the people had prayed until their voices were thin. "The sky hears," they said. "The sky hears slowly, but it hears." King Agumba watched all this with a quiet, far-seeing look. He was thinking about the sky's slow ear and the earth's patient heart. He was thinking about time and its strange ways. Later, in the quiet after the feast, when the torches were embers and the palace slept the sleep of tired joy, the king and Queen Ifedi walked the inner courtyard. The ground, still damp, held the prints of feet that had danced. A frog sang from somewhere close. The queen's hand lay lightly on the king's arm. "My husband," she said, "this night felt like a promise." He looked at her and answered, A promise is a rope you hold until it pulls you to the shore. They stood together and listened to the frog, to the soft drip of water from the eaves, to the world resting. But promises do not always come swiftly. Days became weeks. The palace woke and slept, woke and slept. Couriers ran with news. Farmers brought disputes. The elders returned with calm words and careful thoughts. The king judged and blessed, praised and cautioned. Queen Ifedi smiled and waited, prayed and listened. The kingdom carried on like a great pot simmering on a fire, steady and sure. Yet beneath the steady surface, a small current moved, the way a river can carry a secret speed under a calm top. People counted time not only by moons, but by their own worry. The worry did not change the king's face in public, but in private, it carved a quiet path on his brow. The queen saw it, and her heart beat in a soft, anxious rhythm. She did not want the kingdom to weaken. She did not want the elders to stand again in a circle and speak the names of men who might claim the stool if fate did not bend their way. She did not want her husband to be remembered as the king who could not open the door of his house to a child. One evening, as a red sun slid behind the line of trees and the sky wore the color of ripe palm fruit, the king stood at the palace gate and looked toward the far hills. A guard, not wishing to disturb his thought, kept a respectful distance. The king spoke without turning. "There is a path in the forest," he said, "that even hunters do not like to walk. But if a man must walk it for the sake of his people, he will go." The guard bowed, though the king had not asked for an answer. In her room, Queen Ifedi sat before a clay lamp. The flame shivered as if it knew secrets it could not say. She lifted her eyes and whispered, "Spirits who see what we cannot see, watch me. I will do what a woman can do for the peace of her house." Her words were not loud, but they shook more than walls. They shook the line between longing and decision, between waiting and walking. That line was thin now. The night listened, and in its listening there was the breath of what would come. The moon rose and looked down on Ezinagu, on its huts and courtyards, on its sleeping children and watchful elders, on a king whose heart held steady like a drumbeat, and on a queen whose quiet courage was beginning to shape itself into a road. The kingdom did not know yet how that road would change it. The drums were silent, the torches were out, but the story had taken a step toward the forest, and the forest was waiting with old eyes and old answers. The rains had softened the earth, and green shoots sprang up everywhere, turning the land into a living carpet. The people of Ezinagu worked their farms with renewed strength, and laughter returned to the market. Yet, inside the palace, Queen Ifedi's heart did not rest. Each day, she greeted the children who ran about with dirty feet and bright eyes. And though she blessed them with a smile, her heart bent under the weight of emptiness. She saw mothers with babies tied to their backs, and the ache in her chest grew sharper. It was not just her own longing anymore. She felt the whispers of the land, the questions unspoken, yet loud in every look. King Agumba still held the kingdom with steady hands. He judged fairly, gave generously, and led with wisdom. But when night fell and they were alone, the queen saw how tired he had become. He often sat in silence, staring into the flame of the clay lamp, as if trying to read the future inside it. She wished she could ease his burden, wished she could place a child on his lap and silence the whispers forever. Yet the moons kept passing, and her womb remained silent like an untouched field. One evening, as the crickets sang and the air smelled of rain, a woman from the palace servants came quietly to her. The woman, old and bent but sharp-eyed, whispered, "My queen, there are shrines deeper than the ones men speak of. There are altars that do not sit in the open sun. Sometimes, when the gods are slow to answer, other voices answer faster." Queen Ifedi looked at her long and hard. her heart racing. She had been raised to fear the forbidden places, but desperation has a way of opening doors that were meant to remain closed. That night, she lay beside the king, her eyes open, though he slept peacefully. She thought of the old woman's words, and her heart beat like a drum. She asked herself, what is the worth of fear when the land waits for an heir? What is the worth of waiting when silence is all I hear? The decision did not come in a flash. It crept into her like a slow-moving shadow. By the time the first clock crowed, her heart had already chosen. The following market day, she dressed simply, covering herself with a wrapper and tying a scarf over her head. She told the palace she was going to bless the women in the market and share food with them. No one questioned her, for she often walked among the people. But instead of turning toward the market square, she slipped into the narrow path that led to the forest. The path was damp and quiet, with tall trees that whispered secrets when the wind moved through their leaves. Her sandals grew heavy with mud, but she did not stop. Her fear was strong, but her longing was stronger. She walked until she reached a place where the trees grew so thick the sunlight barely touched the ground. There, hidden among roots and rocks, was a shrine that looked as old as the earth itself. Its walls were darkened by smoke, and strange carvings marked the stones. The air was heavy, filled with the smell of old sacrifices. An old priestess, thin as a broomstick, but with eyes sharp as a hawk's, came out to meet her. "I know why you are here," the woman said, before the queen spoke a word. "Your womb has been closed by the stubborn silence of the high gods. But here, silence does not reign. Here, bargains are made." Queen Ifedi trembled, but she did not turn back. "I am ready," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. The priestess nodded and led her inside. The shrine was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a fire in the corner. Strange masks hung from the walls, their eyes watching. The priestess drew lines on the ground with chalk and placed a small pot before the queen. "If you want a child, you must give something," she said. "Nothing in this world comes without a price. Are you ready to pay?" The queen's hands shook, but she thought of the king's weary eyes and the whispers of the people. She thought of her own heart, aching each time she saw a child laugh. "I am ready," she whispered. The priestess smiled, showing teeth stained red with cola. "Then listen well. You shall have your son. He will be strong. He will carry the stool, and the people will rejoice. But his birth will carry a shadow. The land will pay, as you have asked for what was not freely given. A curse will walk with him." The words struck the queen like a cold wind, but her longing was too deep to let them break her. She lowered her head and agreed. The priestess poured libations, spoke strange words, and tied a charm around the queen's waist. The fire crackled as if it knew secrets. When the ritual ended, the queen walked back through the forest, her heart torn between fear and hope. She told herself, "I have opened a door. May the gods forgive me if I have opened it wrongly." Days passed, and the queen returned to her duties, her face calm, though her heart carried a heavy secret. She did not tell the king where she had gone. She prayed he would never know. The king believed the gods would answer in their time, and she could not bear to see his face if he learned the truth. She carried her secret alone, like a pot filled with hot coal, burning but hidden. The palace returned to its rhythm. Messengers ran in and out. Drums called for meetings. Farmers came with disputes. At night, the king still prayed to the ancestors, asking for a child. And quietly, without his knowing, the queen carried inside her the weight of a forbidden bargain, a bargain that would one day shake the kingdom to its roots. For the first time in many moons, her heart began to hope. She placed her hands gently on her belly and whispered, "If you are coming, come quickly. I will carry you, no matter the cost." But far beyond the palace walls, in the deep quiet of the forest shrine, the old priestess sat by her fire, her eyes half closed. She whispered to herself, "The seed has been planted, the child will come, but so will the shadow. When the people dance, let them remember that every dance carries both joy and sorrow." The days that followed the queen's visit to the hidden shrine seemed ordinary on the surface, but underneath the surface, her body began to hum with a quiet change. She woke before the first cockcrow, not with worry, but with a soft stirring that felt like new wind moving through the leaves of a closed grove. She ate with more hunger than before and slept in short, deep pockets of rest that left her calmer than usual. She did not speak of these changes, but she counted them like beads, one after another, each a sign that her silent prayer had found a path. King Agumba noticed her glow before she understood it fully herself. He did not say much at first. He watched the way she stood in the courtyard, her palm resting on the curve of her belly, as if she were listening to something there. He watched the way her face brightened when a young child ran past and laughed. One evening, as they sat near a small clay lamp and the glow brushed their faces, he said quietly, "Ifedi, your eyes look like morning after heavy rain." She smiled and looked down, afraid her joy would run wild if she looked too long into his hope. Days lengthened and softened into weeks, and the queen's steps changed. The women of the palace noticed and began to speak in gentle voices. They surrounded her with care and caution, as if a butterfly had landed on their open hands and must not be frightened away. They offered soups rich with leaves and soft meats. They burned sweet herbs to bless the air of her room. The oldest among them, who had seen many births and remembered more, ran careful palms over the queen's belly and nodded. "There is life," they said. "It is a kind life. It is a strong life." When the truth settled like dew on a cool morning, the queen and the king stood together in their chamber and wept, not with loud voices, but with the quiet that comes from a long thirst being answered by a clean stream. King Agumba lifted both hands and gave thanks to the ancestors and to the gods he had called for so long. He led a simple offering at the royal temple. No loud drums, no boastful songs. He placed kola and clean water on the altar and said only, "You have remembered us." He did not know that another altar, hidden deep in a forest, had already claimed its price. The queen stood near him, her eyes lowered, the charm tied by the hidden priestess tucked away in a gourd where no one would see it. Her heart held two things at once, a rising bright joy and a secret that charred the edges of her peace. News moved swiftly. Messengers carried it like antelope, swift-footed and bright-eyed. The market broke into song. The yam sellers added a handful more to each basket for good luck. Goat horns sounded from clay-streaked verandas. Men pounded the earth with their heels, creating small clouds of dust. Old women clapped their hands and said, "The sky has heard," while young women tied wrappers high and danced with the easy grace of palm fronds in wind. Even the river seemed to run with fresh laughter, and fishermen said their nets felt lighter to carry. In the palace, the praise singers prepared a new chant. They mixed the king's battle victories with the promise of an heir and wove a refrain that rose like flame. A stool that will not be empty, a house that will not be quiet. They sang it softly at first, as if they were afraid to wake a sleeping blessing. Then, when the signs were too strong to ignore, they let the drums answer louder, and the palace courtyards filled with the steady heartbeats of celebration. Queen Ifedi's months were gentle, though sometimes the dream of the hidden shrine returned to her at night, and she would wake with her hand pressed to the charm she no longer wore, but could not forget. She told herself, that life was forming inside her, and that life was stronger than any shadow. Someday she believed it. Some nights she did not. Still, she planned for the small hands she would hold. She asked the palace craftswomen to weave a soft cloth the color of evening and to bead a tiny anklet that would sing when a baby's feet learned their first steps. She oversaw the cleaning of a room where the baby would sleep, its walls smoothed and painted with simple figures of birds and rivers, the things she hoped would follow her child with blessing. The day of birth arrived like thunder that rolls a long time before the rain falls. The first pains came with a suddenness that bent her forward, but she stood her ground. The women gathered around her, steady as tree trunks, their voices low, their hands sure. They sent the young ones to carry warm water and fresh leaves for washing. They tied the queen's hair back and supported her with calm arms and firm words. The air in the chamber grew hot and sweet with the smell of herbs, and outside the door, a circle of women began to hum the old song that had welcomed countless children into the world. King Agumba waited in the outer courtyard, still as a carved pillar, his ears open to every sound. He could not enter. That was the law of the house and the law of the land. He paced, then stopped, then paced again, looking at the sky as if it could tell him how long a man must hold his breath. The elders stayed with him, speaking little, each of them staring at the doorway as if it were the edge of a new world. The praise singers stood apart, drums silent under their arms, and whispered prayers they usually sang only with their eyes. The queen labored as the sun climbed and then leaned west. She did not scream, though the pain was sharp and deep. She held it like a woman who had known other pains and refused to be humbled by this one. The oldest midwife, a woman whose hands had brought many first breaths into daylight, leaned close and murmured, "Your strength is a river. Let it carry you." The queen nodded, sweat shining on her face. Behind her clenched jaw, a thought kept beating its wings. Let him come safe. Let him come free. Let him come without the shadow that followed my steps into the forest. When the baby slid into the world at last, the room shifted. The air felt thinner, brighter, charged with a trembling none of them could name. The baby was washed and lifted to the light. He was strong. He was whole. He was a boy. And when the cloth was drawn back from his face, the women gasped. His eyes, still wet with the first water of life, glowed softly like embers that refused to die. Not a harsh light, not a burning fire, but a pulsing ember glow that made the room feel like a shrine where a lamp had been always kept. For a heartbeat, fear hung in the air like smoke. Then joy wrestled it aside. The chief midwife cried, "He is beautiful," and placed him in his mother's arms. Queen Ifedi's heart broke open in a way that felt like healing. She kissed his brow and whispered, "Obioma," for the name had been chosen in secret, and now it fit him like a cloth woven long ago for this very moment. "My heart's good, the good of the people," she said, voice trembling. She pressed him close and wept from a place she did not know she had. For a moment she believed that love alone could turn any shadow into light. The announcement reached the courtyard with a rush. "A son!" The word leaped from mouth to mouth. King Agumba fell to his knees and touched his head to the earth 3 times. The elders lifted their hands in blessing. The drums broke their silence like rain breaking a long drought. They pulsed and rolled. They shouted and leaped. The palace exploded with voices praising the child, the mother, the father, the gods, the ancestors, the very earth. Gifts poured in. Calabashes of palm wine, baskets of yams, goats with bright cloth tied around their horns. The praise singers lifted their new chant to the sky, and the sky returned a wind that cooled the fever of long waiting. That evening, when the sun gave the walls a copper color, the king entered the queen's chamber, stepped carefully among the bowls and cloths, and looked on his son. He had fought in battles. He had seen men fall and rise. He had faced dangers that would bend a weaker spine. But nothing had ever made his hands tremble, like seeing that small face turn toward him with ember eyes open and knowing. He touched one finger to the baby's palm, and the tiny fingers closed around it with a strength that startled him. Obioma, he whispered, tasting the name as if it were a first fruit. He raised his head to his wife and met her gaze. In her eyes, he thought he saw the end of their sorrow. In her eyes, she saw the beginning of a different one. Through the night, songs drifted across the palace like fireflies. Women's voices rose and fell in melodies older than any stool on earth. Men clapped and told stories of signs that had foretold this day, signs they had not understood until now. At the edge of the celebration, the queen lay with her son and listened. She counted his breaths. She watched his eyelids quiver as he slept. She traced his tiny ear with a finger and found the shape of her own in it. She thought over and over that love is a binding stronger than fear, until he woke and cried. His cry began as any baby's would, a small, tight sound born of hunger and confusion. But the sound traveled beyond the walls, beyond the palace, beyond what should have heard it. In the small grove near the north gate, 3 young palm trees bent and then shivered as if struck by a wind that did not touch their fronds. Their leaves curled, their hearts darkened, and by the time the child drew breath again for a second cry, the life inside those saplings had retreated. In a pen not far from the royal kitchens, a ewe staggered and fell, her breath leaving in a thin whistle. The herdsman knelt, bewildered, pressing his ear to her ribs as if he could call life back by listening harder. At the river bend where women usually laughed and filled their pots, the water turned the color of a storm sky and then went dark like an eye suddenly missing its light. A fisher, standing ankle deep where he threw his net every morning, cried out and stumbled back, his net trailing black drops that smoked where they fell on dry earth. In the queen's chamber, none of that was yet known. The child's short cry ended. He settled. The queen held him close and hummed the soft, rising tune that women had used for ages to call babies back to calm. She did not notice at first that the air had changed its taste, that the flame of the lamp had dipped and flared as if caught by an invisible hand. She breathed in his hair and whispered the simple, sweet names mothers had always used: child, heart, breath, good one. By morning, the palace began to learn. The herdsman came to the outer court with fear in his face and dark stains on his hands. The keeper of the small grove woke the gardeners from their beds, and they stood in a silent ring around the curled palms, hats in their hands, mouths thin as lines. A maid who walked early to the river returned breathless, carrying a pot that smelled wrong and looked worse. The elders met in the cool of the East Hall, and their faces were the color of strong clay, set and grave. They sent for the king. King Agumba listened without interrupting. When they finished, he stood a long time without moving. He did not look at the floor or at the sky. He looked inward to the place where a man meets his own spirit in a clear mirror and does not turn away. Then he said, "No word of this leaves the palace." His voice was steady, as if steadiness could push back whatever had entered with the child. "We will watch, we will measure, we will not let fear grow wings." The elders bowed, but fear already had a root in their hearts. They felt it there, small and hard, and they knew roots do not stay small if the earth feeds them. The king walked to the queen's chamber. He stood in the doorway for a short while, watching mother and child sleep. It would be easy, he thought, to pretend that all was well, to believe that a few dead goats and a patch of river water meant nothing in a land as large as Ezinagu. But he had not kept his stool by pretending. He stepped forward, and Queen Ifedi stirred, opening her eyes. She saw his face and knew at once that celebration had ended and judgment had started. He told her what he had heard, all of it, without dressing it in soft cloth. She listened and held the baby tighter. She felt a slow, cold understanding rise through her like smoke from wet wood. She remembered the old priestess's words, "You shall have your son. He will be strong. The land will pay." She had believed that payment would be a thing she could barter with the gods. A necklace of beads, a sacrifice of goats, a vow taken on clean ground. She had not imagined this. Trees that curled from a baby's cry, water that lost its face. Her tears came, not in a storm, but in a thin, hot line down her cheeks. "I did not know it would be like this," she said quietly. But the king heard more than the words. He heard the shape of something hidden behind them and felt the weight of a question he did not yet dare to ask. He bent and kissed the child's brow. The ember glow in Obioma's eyes fluttered under baby lids. "He is mine," the king said in a voice that sounded almost to himself. "He is ours. He is the kingdom's. We will protect him." He looked at the queen, and because love and fear lived alongside each other in him, he added, "We will protect the kingdom too." She nodded, but her mouth trembled, and he had to look away. The days that followed were a woven cloth of joy and dread. When Obioma slept and smiled his small, secret smiles, the queen's heart floated. When he cried, they braced. Sometimes nothing happened. Sometimes a goat stumbled. Sometimes a row of bean plants went limp, as if they had decided all at once that growing was no longer worth the trouble. Word of these small sorrows slipped out in threads, and the palace hurried to knot each thread short. The king sent meat and yam to the households that suffered sudden loss. He ordered the grove cleared of the dead palms and new ones planted immediately, as if speed itself could make the land forget. He sent priests to bless the river, and they cast white chalk into it, watching as the chalk spread like milk and then thinned away into nothing. Among the people, hope and fear warred like two rams in a narrow pen. The rams backed away and charged again and again. Some said, "Every blessing tests us first." Others whispered, "A child who draws darkness with his first breath will pull deeper night when he walks." Women crossed their fingers behind their backs when they spoke the prince's name, as if to bind their words before they could turn to ill luck. Men stared at the palace roofline at dusk, waiting for a sign that life would settle back into the old rhythm. The sign did not come. Instead, quiet changes continued, too small to fill a drum with, yet too many to ignore. Queen Ifedi moved like a guardian spirit through these days. She learned the rhythm of her son's cries and tried to outrun them with quick feeding, quick rocking, quick soft songs. She discovered which lullaby made him blink slow and which one made his hands loosen their tight curve. She found that if she laid him on her chest and breathed deep, matching her breath to his mouth would relax, his body would sink into her, and the house would stay safe a little while longer. She memorized every line in his small face. She kissed his fingers as if each one were a promise she might yet keep. But love did not erase guilt. In the middle of night, when the crickets paused and the palace slept the kind of sleep that remembers what it dreamed, she saw the old priestess's eyes again. They did not accuse, they only reminded. She would wake and sit upright, listening to the walls breathe and whisper, "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." Not sure whether she spoke to the gods, to the land, to the child, or to herself. She began to fast on the market days, taking only water and a bit of leaf at dusk. She asked the palace priest to bless the child's charms with clean prayers and no hidden names. She gave gifts to widows and to children without fathers, as if she could pour sweetness into the land faster than sorrow could drink it. King Agumba, meanwhile, built a fence of silence. He called his closest guards and most trusted servants and made them swear on the staff of office that no word of the strange signs would pass their lips outside the palace. He spoke to the elders and asked them to hold their peace while he sought a path. He dismissed the praise singers for a time, saying the palace needed quiet more than music. He ordered the chief priests to remain near the palace for the next moons, to read the shells each morning and listen to the night each evening. He sent hunters to speak to old men in distant hamlets who knew stories that most had forgotten, stories of children born under rare moons, of curses tied to breath, of bargains made in secret. Every night he went to the royal temple and spoke to the altar until his voice was low and rough as a drum that had been beaten too long. The elders, loyal but afraid, began to plan paths inside their own heads. If a day came when the land could not hold its crops, if a day came when the river refused even the chalk, what then? Some thought of summoning the far priest from beyond the hills, a man who had a name like a hard fruit and a reputation for breaking strange bonds. Others whispered of asking the gods whether a prince, even a beloved one, could be raised away from the palace, hidden under another name until the land became used to him, the way a goat becomes used to a rope. No one spoke these thoughts to the king, for he was not a man to hear such things kindly. Obioma grew as babies do, faster than anyone expected. His eyes kept their ember light, and when he looked at people, they often had the sensation that he was not only seeing their faces, but also something behind them, like footprints on the floor of their hearts. He watched hands more than he watched mouths, and he reached often for water, as if he knew already that water could both heal and hide. When he laughed, the sound was pure, and the land, perhaps out of mercy or confusion, stayed calm. When he cried, even for a heartbeat, the palace braced, and sometimes the kingdom winced. As the moon thinned to a sliver and then fattened again, a dry wind began to visit the fields earlier than it should have. The farmers frowned and lifted dust in their palms, letting it fall through their fingers. "It is not time," they said. "Why does Harmattan come with an eager foot?" The king sent gourds of oil to rub into children's skin and ordered more wells checked and cleaned. He moved like a man holding back a flood that no one else would admit was there. On a quiet afternoon, while the shadow of the palace gate stretched long and narrow across the swept earth, Queen Ifedi sat under a shade tree with Obioma in her lap. A little boy from the servants' quarters wandered near, drawn by the soft chime of the anklet on the prince's tiny foot. He stopped a safe distance away and stared with round eyes. The queen beckoned him with a gentle hand. "Do not fear," she said. "He is only a child." The boy looked at Obioma's eyes and hesitated, then inched closer. The prince stared, then smiled. The boy's face opened like a flower. He clapped, a small pop of joy, and the queen's heart rose as if someone had lifted a weight from her shoulders. She gave the boy a nut and watched him run away, spinning with delight. For a moment, it felt as if the future might yet be written in simple lines. That night, Obioma cried twice. In a nearby garden, a row of cassava leaves drooped. Farther off, a small stream that fed a farmer's plot slowed to a sluggish thread. The palace recorded each change with careful, fearful hands, as if record-keeping could tame reality. The king stood at the threshold of the queen's room and watched mother and child asleep at last. He whispered, "I will hold this house together," and the words sounded both like a vow and like a prayer a man makes when he knows he is standing at the mouth of a long road. The story of Ezinagu had turned, and everyone felt the turn, though not everyone knew its name. The drums beat less often. The storytellers chose their tales more carefully. Laughter still lived in the courtyards, but it did not jump as high. The river ran, but people watched it as if it were a face that might change without warning. Queen Ifedi carried her son through this new season, as a woman carries both a gourd of water and a live coal. Careful not to spill the one, careful not to scorch her skin with the other. King Agumba stood beside her, fierce in love, fierce in duty, silent where words would only weaken him. In the far forest, where the hidden shrine kept its own calendar, the old priestess sat by a dying fire and whispered to herself, "The bargain has spoken, the child will grow, the land will learn the language of his breath." She fed a sliver of dry wood to the coals and watched them glow like the prince's eyes. "There will be joy," she said, "there will be sorrow." Then she closed her eyes and listened to the night, which was full of wings, some small and harmless, some wide and dark as prophecies. So the third chapter of the palace's new life set itself in place. A child adored and feared, a kingdom grateful and unsettled, a king who built a wall of silence against the rising tide, and a queen whose love was a shield that could not stop the arrow she herself had loosed. And though the people tried to live as before, the land itself had learned a different drumbeat, one that would carry them toward days when choices would burn, when truth would not sleep, and when the name Obioma would become the center of every prayer spoken under the Ezinagu sky.